My name is Alfredo Vicencio, and I'm an evaluation specialist at the Climate Investment Funds. Welcome to our TCLP working sessions. The Transformational Change Learning Partnership is built on knowledge sharing and consultations with policymakers, evaluators, and other experts in climate action to develop concepts, methods, and metrics for transformational change, which led us to having this 1-hour monthly virtual sessions or working sessions. Today is our 1-year anniversary, actually, from having these monthly 1-hour virtual working sessions. And there's no better way for us to do it than through a joint event with the MCFs, Independent Evaluation Units. So we're very happy to have them here. The MCFs have contributed and led so much the broad notion of transformational change, and Scott's going to present a little bit about that later. But without further ado, let me quickly introduce Gita. Gita Batra is the Chief Evaluation Officer and Deputy Director at the Global Environmental Facility Independent Evaluation Office. I think that's probably it. Gita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alfredo. A very good day to everyone now. It's a pleasure to be here. And for the last year, I've actually taken the helm at the Independent Evaluation Office of the GEF. So I'm now the Director of Evaluation, of Independent Evaluation at the Global Environment Facility. It's a pleasure to be here. I just wanted to introduce this session by saying that the Independent Evaluation Units, or the Internal Learning Units, of the 4 climate funds, the Climate Investment Funds, the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, and the Global Environment Facility, as well as the Adaptation Fund, we're working together on a number of initiatives, basically to provide evidence and lessons on what has worked, where, why, and basically on areas of shared interest. So some common themes that we've been working on in terms of joint work include lessons and evaluations on forestry, the use of artificial intelligence in evaluation of climate change initiatives, and then the study being presented today, which is basically on transformational change. There's been a long history of the 4 funds working on transformational change, both separately as well as together. And together through the TCLP, and congratulations on the 1-year anniversary. It's been an interesting ride, and I've attended a few of these sessions as well. And also through the technical advisory group meetings of the GEF. For example, I say one sentence about what we've done at the GEF-IEO. We did a study on evaluating transformational change. We came up with a framework, and that's now being applied in the context of GEF projects. So when GEF is addressing transformational change, they use the framework to see what's the possibility that TC will actually be achieved at the very end. So how do you account for this ex ante? And then how do you measure this at the end of a project to know that TC's actually happened, right? But over to Scott, who's going to tell us a little more about this. He's done some wonderful work on frameworks for evaluating transformational change, as well as some lessons. So this is the first piece of joint work that has come to fruition across the 4 funds. And we're very happy that Scott, who is extremely knowledgeable in this area, actually undertook this initiative, pulling the evidence and the lessons from the 4 funds' work on transformational change together. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you. You're just seeing the agenda here, and it's just a slide that SIF has for these. I think we're all professionals and we're familiar with these online forums, so we don't need to go through it. But you will have an opportunity later in the presentation to ask questions, give comments, either through chat or raising your hands. So the purpose of this, as you can see, was to provide key considerations to amplify transformational change. Sometimes we use the acronym TC, work across the funds. And notice we didn't use the word recommendation. We don't want this to be prescriptive. And as I'll talk about later, we recognize each of the fund operates in a unique institutional and operational context. with different mandates, and that's important to keep in mind. So basically, the way this study was organized is we have profiles, each about 7 pages, analyzing how each fund conceptualizes, institutionalizes, and evaluates transformational change, with the caveat, with the recognizing that the Adaptation Fund has not formally adopted transformational change as a formal strategic priority, yet there's a lot of attention to it, nevertheless, in the fund, and they have a lot of elements in it, which we'll touch on briefly later on. So it's primarily a desktop review of secondary data provided by each of the funds, and then calls and a review process for point people at each fund to validate the draft study. And the study is really, in addition to the fund profiles, organized into 2 sections. One section looks at the shared potential for transformational climate action, and then the other section gives a few examples of opportunities for potential collaboration, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So, without any further ado, I want to talk about the shared potential first. I won't be going in depth into the profiles, giving our time constraints, but just kind of teasing out the overall lessons from the exercise. And as I mentioned, each fund has a different mandate, and they do share common challenges and strengths in designing, implementing, and evaluating transformational change. And as I mentioned, for the Adaptation Fund, these might not be specific to transformational change, but they are pursuing systems change, which parallels transformational change work. There are key areas for improvements across the fund. And what I found when I did the study is each of the funds are aware well of this. And I should mention that this is it's an internal study. And we kind of cut to the chase in doing it to tease out what's going to actually help the funds think through how to amplify their shared or collective work. So rather than focusing on what can be done to improve the funds, the study focuses more on a strength-based approach. But let me just touch briefly on some of the areas that was an agreement that they needed to improve upon. And that was better alignment between project design and transformational objectives. There were difficulties fully integrating transformational change frameworks into project design, monitoring, and evaluation, limiting the ability to track and sustain transformational outcomes. There is a need for stronger methods for measuring long-term systemic change. And there's a need for greater consistency in how transformational change is applied across the projects and stakeholders. And what I found is all the funds get that. But what can we do to move beyond that? And that's where the synthesis kicks in. And the way we approach this, or the way I approached that, was to adopt a strength-based approach to better align with the study's purpose. And it's interesting that this was done last quarter last year, and it was done before the shakeup in the aid industry with the new administration in the US rolling out or rolling back its investment in aid. And I raise that because I think it's important for us that do evaluation to be thinking about strength-based approaches to show the efficacy or added value of our organizations. It doesn't mean to stare away from the problems and the critical look at capacity deficits, but we also need to be looking at capacity assets. And that's what this list is about. So it's grounded a lot in appreciative inquiry, finding positive areas of convergence for collaboration, potential for the funds to work across with each other. So First, transformational change as a strategic priority. GCF requires all projects to demonstrate what they call paradigm shift potential, which is their main, not indicator, but what they call transformational change. CIF embeds transformational change as a core investment criterion. GEF treats it as aspirational, and it has an option when any project is doing transformational change. It should be indicated in their project identification form and then be assessed. And although Adaptation Fund doesn't specifically use transformational change, as we'll see, it incorporates elements like scalability and innovation in its medium-term strategy. Conceptualization. Transformational change remains an evolving concept across the funds, and if you're familiar with this industry, beyond the funds as well. But there is convergence at all four funds on the need for fundamental systems change. CIF, GEF, and GCF have distinct transformational change frameworks, which Geeta mentioned a little bit earlier at GEF, and I will elaborate on in the next slide. And the Adaptation Fund recognizes the potential of cumulative local change that contributes to systems change. Emphasis on systems change. Each fund incorporates systems thinking. They recognize that change is nonlinear, it's interconnected, and they recognize the need to go beyond project level interventions. This was across all funds. There's a lot of attention on a portfolio approach where the projects build upon each other over time to contribute to transformational change. Longitudinal and cumulative nature of transformational change. There's a recognition across the funds that systems change across all four funds, and with the CIF, GCF, and GEF, transformational change requires sustained engagement in iterative adaptation. It unfolds over long time scales. Transformational change, as is understood, is it emerges also incrementally, and it's important to scale successful approaches for long-term systemic impact. Scaling as a key enabler for transformational change. All four funds recognize the importance of scalability to drive systemic change, and CIF, GEF, and GCF for transformational change. And scaling is seen as a key element in each of those three funds' transformational change frameworks, which again, I'll have a snapshot of that in the next slide. Innovation is identified as a key enabler for systems change across all four funds and transformational change across the three funds. It's linked to learning, experimentation, being open to failure, and scaling for systems or transformational change. Kind of going through these quickly because I want to leave time for discussion, but there are specific examples from each of the funds. And after I go through this, there will be opportunity to take a deeper dive into this if people are interested. But another point, number 7, is gender equity and inclusion is across all four funds, applied with GCF, GEF, and CIF specifically to transformational change, but also other areas of their work. And definitely with the Adaptation Fund, it's also central in its work. They recognize the inclusive climate action is essential for transformational change. And each of the funds has gender policies and also social inclusion and equitable participation is stressed at each fund. Another area where there's convergence is capacity development for transformational change or systems change, something that I've been working with first at the Adaptation Fund and now at Climate Investment Funds. For GCF, GEF, and CIF, capacity development is foundational enabler of transformational change and also for the sustainability of transformational change. So that that includes or encompasses institutional capacity development, but also capacity development at the community level. And this is here where the Adaptation Fund and its work for building capacity at the community and institutional level for scaling and sustaining systems change is a key element as well, although it's not necessarily quote unquote transformational change. It plays very much into this collective effort. Learning partnerships. Each fund engages in cross-institutional learning partnerships and prioritizes knowledge sharing, which can be leveraged for collective transformational change work. At CIF, this TCLP Transformational Change Learning Partnership, which this series is part of, and TCLP has been around, I believe, since 2018-19, is one prime example. And it's also important to remember that as far as partnerships, CIF itself engages across the MDBs. That's part of its mandate. GEF has many examples, two of which, for example, is a Systems Change Lab and the Earth Eval Community of Practice, which just recently merged with Eval Forward. And I saw that Gita had a post on that on LinkedIn. GCF has a readiness program, which has been very successful, and they've collaborated with the Adaptation Fund in that. And at the Adaptation Fund, it has 3 strategic pillars in its 2023-2027 midterm strategy, and one of them is learning and sharing. And learning and sharing and collaboration cuts across all the strategic frameworks for the funds. And then the last point, keeping an eye on my time here, is evaluating transformational change. All 4 funds evaluate transformational change, or in the case of the Adaptation Fund, elements of transformational change. And for example, each of the 3 funds, GCF, GEF, and CIF, have done targeted evaluations of transformational change and elements of transformational change. And Adaptation Fund as well, elements. For example, they had an evaluation in 2024 of scalability. They've had an evaluation of innovation as well. One of the commonalities that I see across the evaluations that I reviewed is the emphasis on contribution analysis and not just conventional attribution analysis. All the funds recognize the inherent limitations of attribution analysis. It doesn't mean that they throw the baby out with the bathwater. Attribution analysis and quantitative metrics is imperative in this type of work, but they realize that direct causation is difficult to measure, and they acknowledge the challenges of linking systematic change to a single intervention, which I spoke about earlier. There's also increasing attention on ex post evaluation, which I know the Adaptation Fund has been working on, and also GEF, GEF, but also the other 2 funds are looking at as well. And both all 3, CIF, GEF, and GCF, explicitly evaluate transformational change using a multidimensional framework, which Gita mentioned earlier, and which I said I had a slide queued up for. And so you can see in this slide, I've got the Adaptation Fund to the right because they don't have a framework, an analytical framework for transformational change. But when I reviewed the secondary data that was provided to me and having worked with the Adaptation Fund, you can see that they have elements there that are very much important parts of what I call transformational change work. So again, that's on the right. And just as in an example, equitable and social inclusion is an evaluation principle at the Adaptation Fund. And they have evaluation criteria at the Adaptation Fund for scalability and systems change and sustainability. But I just wanted to get the Adaptation Fund covered. Moving to the left, you can see the actual elements of the three respective frameworks for CIF, GEF, and GCF. And actually, CIFs, those are really the three dimensions at CIF. And their framework also has elements like guiding questions and signals. And it's important, I think, to recognize that this is the framework at CIF, but it was actually adopted from its work with TCLP, which this series that I'm speaking at right now is part of. GEF has 4 core criteria, and it was introduced during its influential 2018 evaluation of transformational change, with Geeta mentioned earlier. And I don't think I need to read these all out. You all are capable of reading them. And then GCF has 5 core assessment areas of paradigm shift potential. And it also has scorecards for the paradigm shift potential as well. And an enabling environment as a separate core scorecard for that, which is part of that package at the GCF. And I just want to mention that each one of the 3 funds also has either a working definition, as the case of CIF, or a widely adopted definition, as the case of GEF, of transformational change. And then the GCF defines out what paradigm shift potential is. Again, I'm keeping an eye on my time. I want to wrap up with time for discussion. So we'll be able to dig later on into some of this as people choose. But I also want to cover the opportunities looking forward. And these are 3 concrete considerations that build on those existing strengths and synergies across for collective work for transformational change. And again, they're not prescriptive and they're far from exhaustive. The first one is establishing a shared understanding of transformational change across all 4 funds. And one way to approach this, I mean, we need to realize, GCF paradigm shift potential. GCF was one of the first funds to really start, their mandate is centered on transformational change. That's in their institutional DNA. And it's not like they're going to change the way they're defining it to just because all the 4 funds have to have the exact same definition. It's understandable that each fund can have a different definition, but there are shared transformational change principles that can be broad and adaptable to the distinct institutional and operational context of each funds, yet they agree upon them. And if you're not familiar with the difference between principles and criteria, principles don't specify what you're going to measure or what you're going to do, but they outline the good practices for how you're going to go about doing it. And some of that stuff is what I pointed out earlier. For example, all 4 funds converge on the importance of a systems perspective in this work. All 4 funds recognize the importance of contribution analysis paired with appropriate attribution analysis when appropriate. So that's what I mean by a shared understanding. And a cross-fund process could develop these principles, and they can be disseminated as reference tool for fund partners, implementers, and evaluators. That's the first one. The second one, developing a compendium of metrics and signals for transformational climate action for use across the different sectors and contexts. Each fund has a lot of this already going on: CIF signals, GCF scorecards, GEF scaling typologies, and then the Adaptation Fund has an evaluation criteria that's distinct from the OECD DAC criteria. And the way I look at it, this is not saying which ones to use, but a menu style, a toolbox approach, where you don't, depending on the context and the target populations, you can select from the menu or toolbox what would be appropriate. Again, and it would not be prescriptive, but a living type of resource. And it would be part of a larger knowledge sharing platform between the funds. This could be a shared repository for different transformational change resources that can be used for or shared with implementing partners, evaluators, other stakeholders, co-maintained by all the funds. And it can feature guidance, real-world examples, case studies, context-specific tools. And it can be complemented by an active community of practice like TCLP, which, by the way, all 4 funds are already a member of TCLP, very active members, because I've been involved with this for a while, and anyone that has known that these funds are very much part of it. So I am at the half-hour mark, and I'm going to stop. I'd like to use the remainder of the time, we would like to use the remainder of the time to hear from you. And this is a very crowded slide. Don't worry about the numbered things. I already talked about them. It's just visual eye candy for you to be reminded about the 2 areas that I talked about. But the questions are, do the key insights across the 4 funds align with the experiences and perspectives of those working within or alongside these multilateral climate finance organizations? And then 2, do the potential opportunities identified for streamlining transformational climate action across the funds, do they resonate with you? Are there any that should be revised, omitted, or are there additional considerations that should be included? Okay, so the way I'd like to approach this is, and thank you, and Angela put them in the chat, I see. I'd like to open up to discussion. You can post questions or comments in chat, or you can unmute yourself. I'll ask for Alfredo maybe to help me navigate this. But I do want to give a chance right off. Any reflections from any representative from the 4 funds that might be on this call would be more than welcome before we open it up further. So anyone from the 4 funds? I see Vlad, you got your hands up, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Claude, for this presentation. Just want to confirm that everybody can hear me very well.
Yes, we can, Vlad.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Scott, for the presentation and for all the work that you have done. With the risk of repeating what Geeta said at the beginning, this is a work of the 4 funds, and it's a great achievement of bringing together the different perspectives of the funds on transformational change, while understanding that the funds are different, they have different mandates, but they also have a lot of things in common. I think one important element that I like and probably that resonates with me, that this really helps us understand what transformational change means for all of us, including the Adaptation Fund, but also for the other funds. And I think this study also presents a great basis for us to really look into how we can explore transformational change further and how we can evaluate it further, so that we can generate more evidence, more learnings, and help the adaptation and climate change community and the climate finance community to do our work better, be more efficient, and support our partners. So I'm really happy to see the work that you're doing, and I'm also looking forward to a fruitful discussion today. So thank you again, Scott.
Anyone else? I don't think there's any problem if people want to just unmute yourself or raise your hand. I'm kind of scrolling through this, and I don't see any hands raised as of yet. I thought in doing the study, it was interesting to keep in mind GEF was established in 91, the Adaptation Fund 2001, CIF 2008, and GCF 2010. And of course, transformation really hit the spotlight in 2015 with the UN's 2030 agenda. But we need to realize, particularly with GCF and CIF, it appeared it's very early in GCF's mandate. It's part of it. And CIF picked up on it very early as well. And I think it was very interesting. The study didn't have enough time to look at all the board minutes and all the information that's out there, but it's interesting to see how this surfaces in each of the funds. And if anyone that's worked with the funds or multilateral development bank here has any reflections on that, I'd be very interesting to hear from you.
Scott, it's Mike here. Can I jump in just quickly with a couple of thoughts?
Absolutely.
So just three. I mean, I had the privilege of presenting it at GEF meeting 2 days ago, looking at transformational change. And the biggest thing that struck me there was the value in the diversity of ways in which we understand transformational change, and yet the commonalities allowing for a conversation without us missing each other too much. And I just want to say that there is huge value in that, and I think that we should keep the conversations going. The second one is that the thing that came through in that conversation has come through in many of our evaluations is the difficulty of maintaining a transformational intent as we move from kind of broader programmatic systems orientations to specific projects. And I think that that's a piece of work that we could collectively do in trying to have a look at how best do you ensure that the sort of big picture, the country perspectives that we have in mind are kind of also reflected and supported by the projects. And in that GEF meeting, there was a kind of big arrow with lots of little arrows all lined up, sort of contributing to the transformational change. And somehow we need to get that right. And that brings me to the third point, which is that that there is often this push for simplicity. So we need to find ways of simplifying a very complex concept like transformational change, and doing that in ways that allows us quite quickly to track and to ensure that we're contributing to transformational change, while at the same time not undermining the complexity of the concept. And we see it with these different terms across the different funds. And that's a balancing act I think we're gonna need to find. We'll be pushed to reduce transformational change to easily measurable indicators, and we have to kind of work with that orientation, and at the same time open up space for more complex discussions around things like equity, around things like resilience, which are not going to be easily captured in I suppose, reductionist indicators. So it's kind of a balancing act that we need to work on. So I'll leave it with that, and just really keen to keep discussing and working with this whole community to find answers to some of those really big questions.
Thank you, Michael. And just, I don't know if Michael mentioned that he's actually with the Climate Investment Funds, just in case of anybody, which would be surprising to me, doesn't know him. I say surprising because he's been so instrumental in this work, as have others. Yes, I think one of the things that Michael reminded me of in a conversation last month is this concept of transformational change and simplifying it, yet not dumbing it down. And one person had asked me a question, what's the difference between systems change, complex systems change, and transformational change? Because complex systems change is very much inherent in transformational change. And I think it's important to keep in mind that there can be levels of systems. Even a human being is a system, but there's a household, there's a community, there's a region, national, global, and so forth. And you can have changes in systems, but they might not necessarily be transformational, meaning more of a radical or fundamental change. And that was something that came out of a conversation with Michael earlier in the year when I was working on this. But I think you raise good points, and I see that there are some questions also that were posed in chat. One is aligning TC frameworks is a big task. Absolutely. If we break this down in smaller achievable goals, what would be a step 2 for this goal, assuming step 1 is a dialogue space like this working session? Yes, that was one of the reasons, one of the initial thoughts for a consideration was, how about aligning the frameworks? Wouldn't it be nice to just adopt one framework across the 4 funds? Yet, given the as I mentioned earlier, that particularly their mandate, what they focus on, their operational context, how it differs, we pulled back from that and tried to focus more on some achievable considerations or opportunities, which were the 3 that we focused on and below question 2 there. So I think the person's question really points towards an important consideration for myself and the people that I worked with from each of the funds preparing this study, is being realistic and yet trying to find something that we can, and I felt Vlad talked about this as well, springboard off of this study to explore other opportunities and adapting the systems walk. Let's not be predetermined with this, okay? With we don't always know. Let's be more emergent or developmental, as in developmental evaluation, and listen to communities of practice like this to see where it takes us. So that's why there's a strong lead not to be prescribed about it. There's another thing in the chat here, and please, anyone, put it into chat yourself or raise your hand if you have something to add. How can the learnings be shared so that these funds become efficient in managing their project implementation and supervision costs that they bear? Well, I think right now, this forum and what we're doing now is part of that, which I think is an easy answer. But we do have people from the banks here and from the funds. I'd like to see if anyone who's here would like to take a swipe at answering that question from Venugopal. Anyone like to?
God, I'm not sure you can see hands up, but Lad's hand was up, and I've also raised my hand. But since you're speaking, I'm not sure you can see the hands.
No, I can't. Thank you. I assume that was Neha speaking.
Yes, Lad's hand is up. It was up before mine. least. I think
Okay,
that's it.
why don't you take that, then yourself, Neha, and then I'm going to take Brendan's question. So the first person that had their hand up, please.
Yeah,
Lad.
hi. This is Lad Cannell. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yes, we can.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks to the CIF for organizing this and to the MCFs for pulling together on this important topic. And I'll just say as background, I've been an observer at the CIF for the past 4 years. But one concern that comes to my mind when we talk about transformational change is the importance of policy and governance. And I think, all 4 really of the multilateral climate funds are kind of based on project by project work, which is important. But if you look at, what has been, recommended in studies going back to Nicholas Stern on the economics of climate change, one of the things that is needed is putting a price on carbon, putting a price on greenhouse gas emissions, and, actually reforming subsidies of fossil fuels and things like that. That would be, if you're to take one thing that would transformationally change where the world is headed in terms of climate, that would be one thing. So I'm wondering if it's possible to, fit that consideration into this context. It's how can that be also considered as we look at what can make transformational change. Thanks.
Thank you. A very important point. And, I think what I found in the research is that all 4 funds recognize that type of what you can call vertical scaling. Going up, horizontal scaling is global demographic reach. Vertical scaling is in the institutions and in the government structures that they're in. To what degree is there policy shift? But going beyond that, what degree is the policy, take for example the Paris agreements, actually being monitored and regulated as well? And I think you put your finger on a really challenging one. And what I can just say from my perspective, not being in the funds and giving time for other people, because I see some hands are coming up and there are some good questions, is that I felt the funds recognize that, Lad, and it's quite frankly, it's going to be an ongoing conversation. Because as we see with even some of the biggest things like the Paris Agreement, even once you get it through, then there's the struggle of getting, walking the talk. So I think it's going to be an ongoing challenge, but I feel the funds are very much aware of it. But thank you for flagging that. Neha, then Niraj, and then I'm going to go back and read Brendan's comment and Tim's, and then we'll take hands after that. Neha.
Thanks so much, Scott. And of course, I was going to speak afterwards, but I'm triggered by some of the questions coming in and what Lad said. And I'd like to respond to Kader, your question as well there, which is asking, as a result of the study, can we say that the funds more or less approach transformational change in similar ways? And I'd say yes. And I think that's been the really exciting thing about the study. We thought that was the case, but through Scott's hard work and going through all the documents and interviewing multiple people, he's actually been able to conclude through this work that yes. And I think at this time, particularly where ideas of, false polarization, where we think we're further apart than we actually are, it's really important to counter that. And the study gives a lot of evidence that we're actually approaching transformational change with its emphasis on systems work, identifying systems, knowing where the boundaries are of the systems that we're trying to change, understanding the interconnectedness of these systems, and then using enabling tools such as innovation, such as inclusion, focus on gender, looking at different types of scaling. All the funds are doing this, and we're just closer together than we may otherwise think. And that's what this body of work is really helping us understand. There was a helpful suggestion as well in the chat to do some work on barriers to transformational change. And I think there've been a lot of studies on barriers to systems change, different aspects of transformational change. So barriers to scalability, barriers to inclusion. And I think that would be quite interesting to do from a transformational change perspective. So that could be something that the TCLP takes up. And I just want to say one last thing on alignment. The intention of this work wasn't to ask the funds to align on a common definition or framework. It also feels somewhat unnecessary. Each of these firms have their comparative advantages, their governance systems, their ways of working. And I'm unsure whether alignment is the path towards stronger collective impact. I think that path might lie elsewhere and not necessarily in aligning the frameworks. I think each of these funds could have unique understandings, but their principles are very much aligned. And I think more work, both at the Secretariat and evaluation units of the funds coming together, could help us have more transformational impact. So I just wanted to share those thoughts, and then maybe a few more later. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Nia. And I think you touched on some of Brendan's question. If I can, Niraj, let me just take Brendan's question real quick, and then we'll go to you, because I'm reading it now and yes, Brendan, I think Nia addressed your points, and a lot of systems analysis that is, I quite frankly think, premises any transformational change intervention, looking at the barriers and levers or drivers for transformational change is front and center. And there are different frameworks, analytical frameworks for doing that. And we do have a guide with SIF, not just the design guide, but also a diagnostic guide. And I'm looking at Mike here. That's going to be coming out shortly. And I worked with my colleagues at SIF, and when Neha was at SIF, producing those. So we're really looking forward to that. So I just wanted to respond to that. Okay, Niraj, you're on mute.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to build on Michael's point on different ways of talking about transformation, and how in the recent meeting that he was there, people were talking about the same issue and using a different language. Being the oldest fund, GEF has given attention to transformational change. It has often been packaged in different ways. Sometimes it's talked about in terms of catalytic effect of GEF, where what's being said is our projects by themselves would not probably make the big change, but there are other things that we can do to increase the potential. Another thing that we talk about is broader adoption, the processes through which transformative change may happen. And these type of discussions have taken place way before, like 2015, when people may have started packaging some concept around the term transformation. So my issue here is more in terms of there are a lot of overlapping concepts that have a lot to do with transformation, like Neha also just pointed out about say barrier change, and Jeff was working on barrier change specifically 2002 to 2006. So many of these things, people knew what they wanted. It's to me like it's giving it a formal structure and way to think about it. So how well can we also think about these other related concepts and bring the knowledge that is there in the discussion? I mean, that to me would be an important contribution, because if you start from 2015 onwards, then it's kind of a lot of information lost. Okay.
Yeah, I think you raise an excellent point. Thank you. And there's not going to be one answer to that, but I think this is part of the process, what we're doing right now, having a study that looks across the 4 funds. I think recognizing, transformational change like sustainable development back in the 90s is a buzzword, but we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a buzzword because it points to the need to look at how we need rapid change, systems change to address some of these larger problems that we're confronting. And I think people get that. At the same time, they realize that there's a lot of emergent learning. For example, I know with CIF, their definition of transformational change has evolved, and they even call their current definition a working definition. With GEF, its evaluation changed from talking about large-scale impact in an area of global environmental concern to now they use the word major environmental concern. So indicating that, the scope's even larger. It's not just limited to global transformational change, but it can be a major change in a region or in another scale. So I think realizing that the learning's emergent and the understanding evolves is part of the process as well. But I think you raised some great points there. And I think that's what part of this effort in maybe bringing together some type of piece that looks at shared principles or understanding across the funds can help address that, Neeraj. Tim, are you still with us, Tim? Maybe you can just unmic yourself if you are, because I don't want to read through your comment. Everyone might have read it. I just want to give you the talking stick and see if you have something you want to tease out of that or add.
One is I'm just really excited about the insights that have emerged from this study, and it's exciting to hear around the alignment, and even if there's different vantage points on transformational change. So I think this is really exciting. The two thoughts I had, I love the opportunities that were identified in the slide that you had up and were presented earlier. The two I was thinking about is I think that there's a case to make for the value of evaluative work in supporting work on metrics and signals, just given the importance of qualitative understanding of transformational change, to what extent it's happening, why it's happening, and really remembering to push on the evaluation front and remind people about how it can really complement work on metrics. And I also share the concern that Mike had expressed about the drive for simplicity and reductionists can lose a lot of the richness around what really enables transformational change to happen. And then I think also just continuing to recognize the importance of creating opportunities for people across institutions, across countries, within countries, finding these different ways for people to get together to actually have conversations about transformational change and what are we learning. And so making sure that we're actually using and contributing to these evidence bases, knowledge sharing centers, and just because I think that we often go to the technical solutions and forget the importance of slowing down and taking time for people to interact to really explore these really challenging concepts. And I think creating those intentional spaces for interaction can lead to a lot of collaborative opportunities, and particularly as we think about the future of country platforms as a means for coordinating climate and development finance, there's probably a lot of rich opportunities for that. And I'm starting to see great signals of more cross-sector collaboration. And so really, I think anything we can do to encourage those to continue to happen could be really powerful.
Great.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks for the great work.
Thank you. Just a real quick reflection, and then I want to see, we got Kadir has a simple question there. I haven't read it yet, but Tim, on the shared space, one of the things that I've found, and Michael raised this during a TCLP in-person workshop when he brought together people that focused on what is a learning organization. And a learning organization is one that you're talking about the shared space and not just focusing on the technical solutions. I completely agree. Examples, and not just success examples, but failures and being open to failures are really key to that. So I'm glad that you raised that. And that was something I left the TCLP workshop this past autumn from the people Mike had gathered together to look at learning organizations. Okay, and Kadir, a simple question from my side. Can we tell as a result of the study, the differences in transformational change means more or less the same for all MCFs? I think so. I think they each wordsmith it differently. Even paradigm shift potential at GCF. But what it boils down to is fundamental significant systems change over time. And what I mean by fundamental is large. Some people can say radical. So I do think I found them all landing on that. And that was one of the findings, Kadir, from that.
We might need to wrap up on that note, and please allow me, everyone, to introduce you to Neha. Well, which she's already spoken, but Neha, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alfredo. And for those who don't know me, I used to be at the Climate Investment Funds, working very closely with Mike and Alfredo and others. And now I'm at the Adaptation Fund, working very closely with my colleague Vlad here. So I'm not going to take more time and wrap this up quite quickly. But first of all, I wanted to say congratulations to the TCLP team on their 1-year anniversary of these webinars. It's really great to have reached this milestone. So congratulations to Mike, Alfredo, Tim, Nasibe, Angela, all the different partners that are present today and have been along this ride. The TCLP, of course, has been an evolving partnership for the last, 8 years now. And it's just really nice to see this community come together whenever they do. On this work specifically and some next steps, I think each of the funds is going to use this to argue for the case to work more together. And that's really the intention that we'd set out at the beginning of this work. So there's a lot that we have in common, even if we don't have a single framework or a single definition, and we're calling similar things by different names. But there is so much that we have in common. And if we are really aiming for transformation change, no one fund will be able to do this alone. We need all the funds working together. We need the philanthropic sector, the private sector, the public sector with the governments at all levels. So I think that's the main conclusion I'll draw from this work, is giving us even more ammunition, even more evidence to build a case for that internally. For the Adaptation Fund, this gives us more motivation to develop a framework on transformational change, because the study really shows how much the Adaptation Fund is doing, aligned with the principles of transformational change, even though it's not calling it that. So I'll just end there. I'm seeing I'm out of time. But thank you so much, everybody, for this opportunity, and especially to the TCLP for supporting this study.
Thank you very much, Neha. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Don't forget to fill out the form that you can see on the chat on the feedback survey for today's session. And we look forward to seeing everyone on March 20th for our next working session, which will be in country platforms to maximize climate action. Thanks, everyone.